My name is Bill Winspear. I'm a tax attorney from Buffalo, New York, and I'm going to talk to you very briefly about solving your IRS tax problem with a bankruptcy. A lot of people get bad information out there. They consult with a bankruptcy attorney or they consult with a tax attorney and they're told bankruptcy can't solve a tax problem. It's very complicated, it's very tricky, and you need to find somebody who knows the rules, but it can be a great advantage to file a bankruptcy to deal with a tax problem, and you might be able to walk away from your tax debt completely if your bankruptcy is planned correctly. So very briefly, it's a complicated topic, and I really can't go over everything in the couple of minutes that are going to be put into this video, but there's basically 3 tests you need to pass to discharge a tax liability in bankruptcy. And it has to be an income tax liability. It's called the 3-year rule. That's test number 1. 240-day rule. That's test number 2. And the 2-year rule. That's test number 3. These are independent tests. You do them one at a time for each tax year you're concerned about that you're going to plan your bankruptcy around. So the 3-year rule is you add 3 years to the due date of the tax return. That's what you need to know. That's the only thing you need to know for that rule. When was the tax return due? Typically, they're due April 15th of the following year. So the 2009 tax return, for example, 2009 tax year, we do April 15th, 2010. Add 3 years to that. 2011, 2012, 2013. April 15th, 2013. You have to be careful about, some years there's a holiday around April 15th, and the due date of the return might be April 17th, April 18th. You need to know that. But let's say for this example, it's April 15th, 2013 is more than 3 years from the due date of the tax return. That's the first test. So if your only tax liabilities are from 2009 and prior, past April 15th, 2013, you pass the 3-year rule for all of those tax liabilities. And then if it's 2010 tax year, then you're going to have to wait another year. 2011, you have to wait 2 more years, etc. 240-day rule, which is your second test, you need to know when the tax was assessed. If you don't know when the tax was assessed, you can get that information from the IRS. An assessment happens when you hand in a tax return. You're self-reporting a tax liability. So at the bottom of the tax return it says, I owe the IRS $5,000. I'm not paying it. I hand in the tax return. 6-8 weeks later, an IRS official will sign a document formally making the tax assessment. And he'll date it, and that's the date. He or she will date it. That's the date you need to focus on. 240 days from the date of that signature, you pass the 240-day rule to file bankruptcy. So for example, I get a tax assessed against me tomorrow. I file bankruptcy 6 months later. That's less than 240 days. I'm not going to pass that test. That tax assessment is not going to be discharged, regardless of when the due date of the tax return was. The third test is called the 2-year rule, and that applies only if the tax return was filed late. If the tax return is filed late, you have to wait a minimum of 2 years to discharge that tax liability in bankruptcy. So for example, I have a 2005, let's say, tax return in my hand, and it's 2014 now. I'm way past the 3-year rule. The 240-day rule has not even begun to run yet because I haven't handed in the return, but it's late. So I hand in the return tomorrow. It's a 2005 tax return. The IRS makes the assessment. I wait 241 days and then I file bankruptcy. That tax is not going to be dischargeable even though I'm past 3 years from the due date and I'm past 240 days from the assessment date. I have to wait 2 years from the date I filed that return for it to become dischargeable in bankruptcy. So, in a nutshell, a quick review, if I can pass the 3-year test, the 240-day rule test, and the 2-year test, I can file a bankruptcy and I can wipe out my income tax liabilities using a Chapter 7 bankruptcy.